I was scrubbing the marble floor when I first saw him. The billionaire everyone talked about. The man who could buy an island before lunch and sell it by dinner. They said a maid like me should never even look him in the eye, let alone speak his name. But I did. And from that moment, my life was never the same. Stay with me until the end. Because this love didn't just break rules. It broke entire worlds. This isn't a fairy tale. There were no glass slippers, no castles waiting for me. What you're about to hear is the story of how a billionaire and a maid, two people from completely opposite worlds, fell in love. And let me tell you, the world wasn't ready for it. His family despised me. Society mocked me. And I almost walked away 100 times. But the truth is, what no one knew was that behind the walls of his empire, he was more trapped than I ever was. I grew up with nothing. My mother worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. My father disappeared before I even knew how to spell his name. By the time I turned 16, I was already cleaning houses, learning to blend into the background, learning to survive. The mansion I worked in wasn't just big. It was another universe. Chandeliers that cost more than my entire childhood home. Golden staircases that I wasn't even allowed to touch. And a silence so heavy, it almost hurt. That's where he lived, Jonathan Hale. The newspapers called him the young king of Wall Street. The kind of man who turned everything he touched into gold. Tall, polished, intimidating. He wasn't supposed to notice someone like me, but one rainy afternoon he did. I was on my knees, scrubbing the entryway, when his shoes appeared in front of me. Not just shoes. Shiny, black Italian leather. Probably worth more than my yearly salary. I froze, waiting for him to scold me for being in the way. Instead, he bent down. "Do you always work this hard?" he asked. I didn't know what to say. No one like him had ever spoken to me like that. Not with curiosity, not with softness. I muttered something about just doing my job, and he smiled. That smile haunted me for days. From then on, things began to shift. Little things. He'd ask me questions no one else cared about. He noticed when I looked tired. Once, when he caught me eating a sandwich in the kitchen during my short break, he sat across from me, sat down, a billionaire, sitting with his maid. "You always look like you're carrying the weight of the world," he said. And I remember thinking, how would he know what that feels like? But then I looked at him closely, and for the first time, I saw it. The loneliness, the exhaustion, the cage behind his polished suit. He wasn't free, not really. The mansion had dozens of employees, but for some reason, it felt like he only saw me. Not the head butler, not the perfectly trained chefs. Me. The girl with calloused hands and second-hand shoes. At first, I told myself it was in my head, that maybe he was just polite, the way rich people sometimes pretend to be when they're in a good mood. But the truth became harder to ignore, because every time he came back from a meeting, his eyes would scan the room until they landed on me. And when they did, it was like he finally exhaled. I didn't understand it. Why me? One evening, I was dusting the library, a place I rarely went because it wasn't used much. I thought I was alone. But then, a voice came from the corner. "Do you read?" I turned and saw him leaning against the shelves. Jacket off. Tie loosened. He didn't look like a billionaire then. He looked like a man who was tired, searching for something. I stammered, embarrassed, and told him I used to read borrowed books when I was younger. He handed me one from the shelf. An old classic. "Take it," he said. I shook my head, panicking. "I can't. If Mrs. Clark, the house manager, sees me, she won't." He interrupted. "Not if I say so." And for the first time, I realized he wasn't just a man in that house. He was the man, and he was choosing to notice me. I left that night with the book hidden under my apron, my heart racing like I had just stolen something priceless. In a way, I had, because from that moment, he wasn't just Jonathan Hale, the billionaire. He was a secret I carried in my chest. Days turned into weeks, and the distance between us kept shrinking. Sometimes it was just a smile across the hall. Other times, he'd ask me to stay a little longer in a room, just to talk. His questions weren't about work or chores. They were about me, my life, my dreams, things no one had ever asked. And I started to see him differently too. Not as a billionaire, not as my boss, but as a man. Still, I tried to fight it. Every time he lingered, every time he found a reason to be near me, I told myself, he's not for you. This isn't your world. But then came the night that changed everything. It was storming outside, the kind of storm that rattled the windows and echoed through the halls. Most of the staff had gone home early, but I stayed behind to finish my duties. I was in the kitchen, wiping the counters, when the lights flickered and went out. I gasped, frozen in the darkness, until I heard his voice. "Don't be afraid," he said softly. "I'm here." He lit a candle, and in that glow, his face looked different, gentler, almost vulnerable. He sat with me at the table, the storm raging outside, the two of us surrounded by shadows and silence. "Sometimes," he whispered, staring at the flame, "I wish I could trade all of this." He gestured at the mansion, the chandeliers, the world he owned. Just to be free. I didn't know what to say. My whole life I had dreamed of being where he was. But he was telling me. He wanted to be where I was. And then, for the first time, his hand brushed against mine. Not by accident, not a mistake, a choice. I pulled back, panicking, my heart racing. "We can't," I whispered. "People would never." He leaned closer, his eyes steady on mine. "I don't care what people think." That was the moment I knew. He wasn't just curious. He wasn't just lonely. He wanted me, and I was terrified. Because falling for him didn't just mean breaking rules. It meant breaking myself. From that night on, Jonathan started seeking me out deliberately. No more stolen glances. No more accidents. He'd find excuses to cross paths with me. To walk into the kitchen when he didn't need to ask me questions when a dozen other people could have answered, to linger, just long enough for my heart to betray me. I tried to stay invisible, but how do you stay invisible to the one man who sees you clearer than anyone else ever has? That's when I realized I wasn't just the maid anymore. I was his secret, and secrets never stay hidden for long. Jonathan found reasons to see me almost every day. Sometimes it was small, asking for a cup of tea only I knew how to make, or requesting help in the library when he didn't really need it. Other times, it was more daring. He'd invite me to walk with him in the gardens at dusk, where the shadows hit us from curious eyes. I kept telling myself to stop, to run, but every time he smiled, every time he listened, every time he looked at me like I was the only person who truly mattered, I felt myself falling deeper. And then, we crossed a line we could never uncross. It was late. The house was empty. I had stayed behind to polish the silverware. Jonathan came into the dining room, loosened his tie, and said, almost casually, "Do you ever get tired of being invisible?" The question hit me so hard, I nearly dropped the tray in my hands. No one had ever put words to the way my life felt. I tried to laugh it off, but he didn't smile. He just looked at me with those piercing eyes. And then, without asking, without hesitating, he kissed me. For a moment, the world stopped. The weight of all the rules, the fear of all the consequences. It disappeared. It was just us. Him and me, a billionaire and a maid, two broken pieces trying to fit together. From that night on, we weren't just a secret, we were dangerous. Because secrets can be hidden. But love changes everything. It didn't take long for people to notice. The other staff started whispering. Mrs. Clark, the house manager, gave me looks that felt like daggers. And soon, it reached the ears of the people who mattered most in his world. His family. They didn't confront me right away. Instead, they tried to corner him. His mother, a woman who wore diamonds like armor, summoned me one afternoon. She looked me up and down like I was dirt stuck to her shoe. Girls like you, she said coldly, come and go. Don't fool yourself into thinking you're different. My son will marry someone of his own world. And you? She leaned closer, her voice sharp as glass. You'll be forgotten. I held back my tears until I was alone. And when Jonathan found me crying in the laundry room, I begged him to let me go. They'll destroy me, I whispered. They'll destroy us. But he just cupped my face and said, then let them try. We tried to keep our love hidden, but love like ours doesn't stay quiet for long. The first real exposure came during one of his high-profile charity galas. I wasn't supposed to be there. I was only assigned to help in the kitchen. But when Jonathan saw me, he asked me to bring him a drink in front of everyone. It was a simple gesture, but the way his eyes lingered, the way his hand brushed against mine as I passed him the glass, it told a story, and people noticed. I could feel the stares, hear the whispers. Who is she? Isn't she the maid? This is unacceptable. By the end of the night, rumors were everywhere. By the end of the week, tabloids had my picture. And by the end of the month, my life wasn't mine anymore. I was mocked online. Gold digger. Trash. A maid-playing princess. Jonathan's business partners called him reckless. His family threatened to cut him off. And me? I felt like I was being suffocated. Like every step I took was under a microscope. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, wishing I could turn back time. I told him again and again, let me go, find someone else, someone who won't ruin your reputation. But he never wavered. One night, after yet another argument with his family, he showed up at the servants' quarters, his tie torn, his eyes red with exhaustion. He sank into a chair and whispered, they'd rather see me alone and miserable than with someone who makes me happy. I knelt beside him, my hands trembling. Then maybe they're right. Maybe I don't belong in your world. And he looked at me, really looked at me, and said something I'll never forget. Then I'll leave my world for you. It all came to a head at another one of his family's elaborate gatherings, a birthday celebration for his father, attended by politicians, CEOs, and the press. I wasn't supposed to be seen. I was told to stay in the background. But Jonathan, he had other plans. When the music slowed, he walked across the grand ballroom, ignoring the stares, the gasps, the whispers, and then, in front of hundreds of people, he reached for me. Dance with me, he said. I froze, shaking my head. Jonathan, I can't. But he didn't let go. He pulled me into the light, into the center of the room, where every eye was on us. And for the first time, he didn't care. We danced, slowly, quietly, the world around us buzzing with shock and outrage. And then his father's voice boomed across the hall. Enough! The music stopped. The guest turned. His father's face was crimson with rage. You shame this family, he spat. Do you know what you're doing? Jonathan held me tighter. His voice didn't shake. Yes, he said. For once in my life, I do. The room exploded. Gasps, whispers, chaos. But all I heard was the beating of his heart against mine. That night, Jonathan lost more than just his family's approval. He lost deals. He lost allies. He lost the life he had been born into. And me? I lost the little bit of invisibility I had left. We weren't a secret anymore. We were a scandal. And scandals always demand a price. After that night, nothing was the same. Jonathan was no longer the untouchable billionaire, the golden boy of Wall Street. He was the man who had humiliated his family in public, the man who chose a maid over an empire. His father cut ties with him immediately. Some of his closest friends disappeared overnight, and the business world, the very one that had once worshipped him, turned cold. I watched it all unfold, with guilt gnawing at my chest. This was my fault. I was the reason he was losing everything. But every time I tried to walk away, he pulled me back. "You think I care about the money?" he'd ask, his voice sharp, almost angry. "I care about you. That's all I ever wanted." But still, the weight of it was crushing. We went from lavish halls and glittering parties to quiet, empty spaces. Jonathan sold the mansion, the one where I had first scrubbed floors, and learned his smile. He said he didn't need it anymore. We moved into a smaller house on the outskirts of the city. For the first time in his life, Jonathan cooked his own meals, drove his own car, and lived without the noise of people serving him. And for the first time in my life, I saw him happy. It wasn't easy. People still whispered. Neighbors stared when they recognized him, when they saw him carrying groceries with me by his side. The tabloids still published stories, painting me as the villain who had stolen a billionaire's crown. Some days, I thought I would break under the pressure. But then he'd take my hand, kiss my forehead, and whisper, "Let them talk. They don't know what we have." There was one night, though, when I truly understood the cost of our love. We were walking home from a small diner, and a group of strangers recognized him. They shouted insults, called me names I can't repeat, accused me of destroying his future. My chest burned with shame, but Jonathan, he stepped in front of me, shielding me with his body. "You want to blame someone?" he yelled. "Blame me. I made this choice, and I'd make it again." In that moment, I knew he wasn't protecting me out of pity or obligation. He was protecting me because he loved me, because I was worth it to him. The months that followed were hard, but something beautiful happened too. Stripped of all the glitter, all the power, Jonathan found freedom, and I found myself. We started building a life together, one made of late-night conversations on the couch, of laughter in a tiny kitchen, of love that no scandal could erase. Sometimes I still think about that mansion, about the world we left behind. I wonder if his family ever forgave him, if his former friends ever understood. But then I look at him, sitting across from me, hair messy, smile soft, eyes full of peace, and I realize none of that matters anymore. He was a billionaire. I was just a maid. But in the end, none of those labels meant anything, because love doesn't care about classes or fortunes. Love doesn't care about the world's rules. Our love shook two worlds apart, and in the ruins, we found each other. And that's worth more than any empire could ever buy. He was a billionaire, and I was just a maid. That's how the world saw us. Two people who never should have even crossed paths. But when I look back now, I don't see wealth or poverty, power or servitude. I see two souls that collided when they weren't supposed to, and refused to let go even when everything tried to tear them apart. If I had listened to the voices telling me I wasn't good enough, if he had bowed to the pressure of his family and the world, we would have lost the only thing that ever truly mattered. We would have lost us. And maybe that's the point of our story. Not that money can buy love. It can't. Not that love erases every struggle. It doesn't. But that real love asks for courage. The courage to stand together, even when the ground beneath your feet is shaking. The courage to hold on when the world tells you to let go. Our love shook two worlds, yes, but what survived after the shaking was stronger, purer, and truer than anything we could have imagined. So, if you're listening to this, wondering if love can cross boundaries, wondering if it's worth the fight, let me be the proof. Love is always worth it. Thank you for hearing my story. And if it touched your heart, I'd love for you to stay with me here. Subscribe, share your thoughts in the comments, and tell me where in the world you're listening from. Because stories like mine, they're not just mine. They belong to all of us who dared to love against the odds.